Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of lace gloves, polished boots, and parlor curtains drawn just so. You're about to meet Elena Hartwell, a young woman in Victorian London, and she's about to receive her very first formal visit from a suitor. The year is 1855. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and rosewater. And if you think modern dating is stressful, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Elena's bedroom. The fire crackles softly in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the wallpaper. Her maid, Ruth, is lacing her corset with the precision of a shipbuilder threading rigging. You can hear Elena's breath catch as the stays tighten. She's not just dressing, she's preparing for a performance. Her hair is pinned in a modest chignon, her gown a pale lavender silk with lace cuffs. Not too bold, not too dull, just enough to say, I am respectable but interesting. Downstairs, the parlor has been rearranged. The best china is out, the piano lid is closed, no impromptu playing allowed. A small bouquet of violets sits on the side table, chosen for their symbolism, modesty, and faithfulness. You didn't know flowers had a language? Welcome to Victorian courtship, where even the wallpaper is trying to say something. Thomas Weatherby is due at 3 o'clock. He's a solicitor's son, respectable, well-mannered, and according to Elena's mother, not too handsome, which is a blessing. You wait with her as the clock ticks. Every sound is amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the distant clatter of carriage wheels, the rustle of Ruth's skirts as she adjusts the folds of Elena's gown. At precisely 3, the bell rings. Her father answers the door. Thomas is announced, not introduced. He enters the parlor with a bow, his coat brushed, his gloves removed and folded neatly. He compliments the weather, the violets, the piano. Not Elena, that would be too forward. You sit beside her on the settee, hands folded, posture perfect. The conversation is light. Books, the Queen's latest portrait, a recent sermon. Nothing personal, nothing improper.
Her mother sits nearby, pretending to read. Her father occasionally clears his throat. Ruth brings tea, and Thomas thanks her by name. That's noted. Kindness to servants is a mark of character. You watch Elena respond with quiet grace, her words measured, her smile restrained. She's nervous, but she's trained for this. Every gesture is deliberate, every glance rehearsed. The visit lasts exactly 45 minutes. Thomas stands, bows again, and promises to call next week. Her father nods, her mother smiles. Ruth clears the tea, and Elena exhales for the first time in an hour. Mainstream fact? Victorian courtship often began with formal, supervised visits in the family parlor, where conversation was carefully monitored and physical contact was strictly forbidden. Fringe tidbit? Some families kept a calling card ledger to track who visited whom, how often, and whether they were worth inviting back. It was basically Tinder, but with embroidery. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely protective or simply performative constraints designed to uphold class boundaries. You walk with Elelena back upstairs. Her corset is loosened. Her cheeks are flushed. She doesn't say much, but you can tell. Something shifted. A seed planted. A possibility opened. And tomorrow, the parlor will be rearranged again.
You're back in Elena's bedroom, and the morning light is filtering through lace curtains like diluted gold. The fire's been lit, the kettle is steaming, and Ruth is already laying out today's ensemble. You're about to discover that Victorian fashion isn't just about beauty, it's about control. And Elena? She's about to be cinched, layered, and sculpted into social acceptability. First comes the chemise, soft cotton, simple, the only layer that touches her skin. Then the corset. Ruth tightens it slowly, methodically, like winding a clock. You hear the breath catch again. It's not pain exactly, it's compression. Her waist is reduced by inches, her posture corrected, her lungs politely discouraged from full inflation. You wonder how anyone flirted while mildly suffocating. Over the corset goes the petticoat, then another, then a crinoline cage, metal hoops that give her skirt its bell shape. She's not just dressing, she's constructing a silhouette. The final layer is the gown, pale blue silk with embroidered cuffs and a modest neckline. Modesty is key. Too much décolletage and she's scandalous. Too little and she's dull. It's a tightrope walk in satin slippers. Her boots are buttoned, 12 tiny buttons per foot, each requiring a special hook. Her gloves are laid out, her hair pinned again, this time with a pearl comb. She's not going anywhere special today, but appearances matter. Even a walk in the park is a performance. Mainstream fact? Victorian women's fashion involved multiple layers, including corsets, petticoats, and crinolines, which could weigh up to 15 pounds and severely restrict movement. Fringe tidbit? Some corsets were designed with steel boning and could reduce the waist to under 18 inches. There were even training corsets for girls as young as 10 years old. Victorian childhood, now with extra compression. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether corsetry was purely oppressive or also empowering, a way for women to assert control over their public image within rigid social norms. You walk with Elena down the stairs, her steps small and deliberate. She can't bend easily, she can't run, but she moves with grace, like a swan gliding across a frozen pond. Her mother nods approvingly. Ruth adjusts the hem, and you realize every stitch is a signal, every layer a message. She's not just dressed, she's encoded. Outside, the world is gray and damp. The cobblestones glisten. Elena steps into the carriage with care, her skirts arranged like origami. She's going to visit her aunt, but really, she's going to be seen. And in Victorian London, being seen is half the battle. So, as you settle into your own blanket, maybe in something slightly more breathable, Remember, fashion wasn't just fabric. It was armor. It was expectation. And for Elena, it was the first step in a very long dance.
You're seated in the parlor again, and this time the air feels different. The tea is poured, the fire is crackling, and Thomas Weatherby has returned for his second visit. You're about to witness the delicate choreography of Victorian courtship, where every glance, every pause, every porcelain clink carries meaning. Elena sits on the edge of the settee, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Her gown today is a soft rose color, chosen for its suggestion of warmth without impropriety. Thomas is more relaxed now, his coat still immaculate, but his voice less rehearsed. He compliments the garden, the embroidery on the cushion, and finally, with a slight hesitation, Elena's taste in books. You note the progression. He's inching closer to personal territory, but only just. Her mother is present, of course, seated nearby with her embroidery hoop. She's not watching exactly, but she's listening. Her father is in the study, close enough to intervene, far enough to allow a semblance of privacy. Ruth brings tea again, and Thomas thanks her with a smile. You remember, kindness to servants is still being tallied. The conversation turns to music. Elena mentions she plays the pianoforte. He asks what composers she prefers. She says Mendelssohn. He nods approvingly. You feel the tension ease slightly. They're finding common ground. But still, no touching, no lingering eye contact, no laughter that lasts too long. Mainstream fact? Victorian courtship was governed by strict etiquette, especially during parlor visits. Physical contact was forbidden, and even emotional intimacy had to be carefully moderated. Fringe tidbit? Some etiquette manuals advised women to avoid laughing too loudly, lest they appear unrestrained. One even warned against showing teeth while smiling. Victorian dating, now with dental discretion. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these rituals genuinely fostered deeper understanding or simply delayed emotional honesty under layers of performance. You watch Elena pour tea with practiced grace. She offers Thomas a biscuit. He declines, then accepts. It's a small moment, but it matters. Every gesture is a test. Every response a clue. You realize they're not just talking, they're auditioning. For each other, for their families, for society. The visit ends with another bow, another promise to return. Elena walks him to the door, her mother trailing discreetly behind. No handshakes, no lingering, just a nod, and then he's gone. She returns to the parlor, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Her mother says nothing. Her father glances up from his paper. Ruth clears the tea. And you feel like you've just watched a play. Quiet, restrained, but somehow electric. So as you sink deeper into your pillow, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't begin with fireworks. It began with tea, with glances, with the slow, deliberate unfolding of possibility.
You're still in the parlor, but the clock ticks louder now. Days have passed. Thomas hasn't returned yet. Ellen Leanna sits by the window, embroidery in hand, though her stitches are uneven. You're about to learn that Victorian courtship wasn't just slow, it was glacial. And every pause, every silence was part of the ritual. The pace is deliberate. Visits are spaced out, once a week, maybe twice if the suitor is bold. Letters fill the gaps, but even those are measured. You don't just write what you feel, you write what's appropriate, what's safe, what won't be misinterpreted by a parent or a maid who might glance too long. Ellen Leanna's mother assures her that patience is a virtue. Her father reminds her that haste is unbecoming. Ruth, ever loyal, says nothing, but brings extra tea. You sit beside Ellen Leanna as she rereads Thomas's last note. It's polite, complimentary, vague. You wonder if he's lost interest. She wonders too, but she can't ask. That would be improper. Mainstream fact? Victorian courtship often unfolded over months or even years with long gaps between interactions and no guarantee of outcome. Fringe tidbit? Some families used courtship calendars to track visits and correspondence, ensuring no one appeared too eager or too indifferent. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether this slow pace fostered deeper emotional bonds or simply prolonged anxiety and social pressure.
You walk with Elena in the garden. It's a supervised stroll, of course. Her mother trails behind, pretending to admire the roses. Thomas finally arrives, hat in hand, apology ready. He was called away on business. He brought a book, Dickens, newly published. Elena accepts it with a smile that's half relief, half restraint. They walk together, 3 paces apart. They speak of weather, literature, and the Queen's latest charity. You feel the tension ease, but only slightly. There's no touching, no declarations, just the slow, careful layering of familiarity. Later, Elena writes in her journal. She notes his kindness, his thoughtfulness, his laugh. She doesn't write, "I like him." That would be too bold. But you see it in her handwriting. Slightly more fluid, slightly more hopeful. You realize that in this world, love doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives like dew, quiet, gradual, almost invisible. And you? You're learning to listen for the silences. So as you settle deeper into your blanket, remember, sometimes the slowest stories are the most enduring. And in Victorian London, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was the only way forward. You're seated at Elena's writing desk now, a small mahogany piece tucked beneath the parlor window. The ink bottle glistens, the blotter is clean, and the letter she's about to write? It's not just correspondence, it's courtship. You're about to discover how Victorian lovers spoke most freely when no one was listening. She dips the pen, carefully, deliberately. Her handwriting is elegant, slanted, and precise. The paper is cream-colored, thick, and faintly scented with lavender. She begins with "Dear Mr. Weatherby," because Thomas would be too familiar. Not yet. Not until something changes. The letter is formal, but not cold. She thanks him for the book, mentions a passage she enjoyed, asks about his family, hopes his work is going well. There's no "I miss you," no "I think of you often," but between the lines you feel it, the warmth, the curiosity, the slow blooming of affection. She signs it, "Yours sincerely, Miss Hartwell." Not "yours truly," not "affectionately," just "sincerely." It's a safe word, a bridge, a maybe. Mainstream fact: letter writing was a central part of Victorian courtship, allowing couples to express thoughts and feelings that were impossible to share in person under supervision. Fringe tidbit: some lovers used invisible ink, lemon juice, or milk so that hidden messages could be revealed with heat. Victorian romance, now with spycraft. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these letters were genuine emotional outlets or simply extensions of social performance, rehearsed and restrained. You watch Elena seal the envelope with wax. She presses her family crest into it, a small rose. Ruth delivers it to the footman, who will take it to the Weatherby residence. And then you wait. Again.
Days pass. Then a reply arrives. Thomas's handwriting is bold, slightly uneven. He thanks her for her thoughts, mentions his admiration for her insight, asks if she's read Tennyson. He signs it, "Yours with respect, Thomas Weatherby." You note the shift. First name, a hint of warmth, a door opening. They exchange letters weekly now, sometimes more. Each one is a thread, weaving a tapestry of shared thought. They discuss books, ideas, even dreams, but never feelings, not directly. That would be too much, too soon. You sit with Elena as she rereads his latest note. Her fingers trace the edge of the paper. Her eyes linger on a phrase. "I find your company most enriching." It's not romantic, not exactly, but in this world, it's practically a declaration. She writes back, quoting Tennyson. She chooses a line about patience, about quiet love. You realize they're speaking in code, in poetry, in the spaces between sentences. So, as you drift deeper into your pillow, remember, in Victorian London, love wasn't shouted, it was written, folded, sealed. And sometimes the most intimate words were the ones never spoken aloud. You're standing at the edge of Hyde Park now, the gravel path crunching beneath your boots. Elena is beside you, her gloved hand resting lightly on her parasol. Thomas walks 3 paces ahead, occasionally glancing back. And behind you? Her mother, of course. You're about to experience the art of the chaperoned outing, where romance is supervised and spontaneity is politely discouraged. The outing was arranged days in advance. The weather is agreeable, overcast but dry. Elena wears a walking dress of deep green wool, her bonnet tied with satin ribbons. Thomas is in a dark frock coat, his boots polished, his cravat impeccable. They greet each other with a bow. No handshakes, No cheek kisses, just a nod and a smile. They begin walking, slowly, deliberately. Conversation is light. The trees, the ducks, the architecture of the Serpentine Bridge. You listen as Thomas compliments the symmetry of the park's design. Elena agrees, noting the elegance of restraint. You realize they're not just talking about landscaping. Her mother trails behind, close enough to hear, far enough to pretend she's admiring the swans. Ruth is absent today. Chaperoning is a parental duty. And in Victorian London, it's not optional. Mainstream fact: chaperones were required for any outing between unmarried individuals of opposite sex, ensuring propriety and preventing scandal. Fringe tidbit: some families hired professional chaperones, older women paid to accompany young ladies and enforce etiquette. Victorian dating, now with freelance supervision. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether chaperoning protected women's reputations or simply reinforced patriarchal control over female autonomy. You watch as Thomas offers Elena his arm to help her over a puddle. She hesitates, accepts. Her mother notes it. You note it. It's a small gesture, but it's loaded. Physical contact, even brief, is a milestone. They continue walking. Thomas asks about her views on charity. Elena speaks of her work with the parish orphanage. He listens, genuinely. You see it in his eyes. He's not just courting, he's learning. They pause at a bench. Her mother joins them. They sit, 3 across. Thomas speaks of his work, his hopes, his admiration for Elena's composure. She blushes. Her mother smiles. You feel the air shift, slightly warmer, slightly more open. The outing ends with another bow, another promise. Elena returns home, her cheeks flushed, her steps light. Her mother says, "He's thoughtful." That's high praise. Ruth helps her change. The walking dress is folded, the bonnet hung. And you realize that even under supervision, something real is growing. So as you curl deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't bloom in secret. It bloomed in plain sight, watched, measured, and quietly cherished.
You're back in the Hartwell parlor. But this time, the conversation isn't about books or weather. It's about character. You're about to witness how Thomas Weatherby is evaluated, not by his bank account, but by his behavior. And in Victorian London, manners were currency. Elena's father sits in his armchair, newspaper folded, spectacles perched on his nose. Thomas arrives promptly, hat in hand, boots clean. He bows, greets each member of the household by name, and compliments the garden, not the daughter. You remember, subtlety is everything. Today's visit is longer. There's no tea tray, just conversation. Her father asks about Thomas's work, his ambitions, his views on civic duty. Thomas answers with calm precision. He speaks of law, of fairness, of the importance of integrity. You watch Elena listen, her eyes flicking between her father and Thomas. She's not just hearing his words, she's watching how he says them. Then Ruth enters with a tray of biscuits. Thomas stands, thanks her, offers to help. Her father notes it. Her mother nods.
You realize that in this room, kindness to servants is a test, and Thomas passes. Mainstream fact? Victorian families often judged suitors by their manners, humility, and behavior toward household staff, not just wealth or status. Fringe tidbit? Some households deliberately staged minor inconveniences, spilled tea, misplaced books, to observe how a suitor responded under pressure. Victorian dating, now with surprise etiquette quizzes. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether this emphasis on character was genuinely moral or simply a coded way to reinforce class boundaries and social conformity. You walk with Elena to the garden after the visit. She's quiet, thoughtful. She says, "He listens." You nod. That's rare. That's valuable. Later, she writes in her journal. She notes his posture, his tone, his restraint. She doesn't write, "I love him." Not yet. But she writes, "I trust him." And in this world, that's the foundation. You realize that Victorian courtship wasn't just about attraction. It was about assessment, about watching how someone moved through the world. And for Elena, Thomas is beginning to pass every test. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow, remember, in Victorian London, love wasn't just felt, it was observed, measured, and slowly, quietly earned. You are seated in the drawing room now, and the air feels heavier, not with romance, but with risk. Elena is reading a letter from her cousin, warning of a scandal in another family. A young woman caught alone with a suitor, reputation ruined, engagement broken. You're about to understand how fragile everything is, and how one misstep could unravel it all. Elena folds the letter carefully, her face pale. Her mother sighs, then launches into a lecture about vigilance. Ruth brings tea, but even the clink of porcelain feels tense. You realize that in Victorian London, reputation isn't just important, it's everything. Every interaction is a potential liability. A glance held too long, a walk taken without a chaperone, a letter too affectionate. Elena knows this. She's careful, but even she feels the pressure. You see it in the way she hesitates before speaking, in the way she checks her posture, in the way she rereads Thomas's letters, searching for anything that might be misinterpreted. Mainstream fact? A woman's reputation in Victorian society was her most valuable asset, and even rumors of impropriety could destroy her prospects permanently. Fringe tidbit? Some families hired private investigators to monitor suitors' behavior outside the home. Yes, Victorian dating sometimes came with surveillance. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these social constraints genuinely protected women or simply reinforced their dependence on male approval and societal control. You walk with Elena to the market, Ruth trailing behind. She greets the baker, the florist, the bookseller. Each interaction is polite, brief, and carefully curated. She's not just living, she's performing. And the audience? Everyone. Later, Thomas sends a note asking if she'd like to attend a lecture on astronomy. Her father approves. Her mother insists on attending. Elena agrees, but you see the flicker of frustration. She wants space. She wants freedom. But she also wants safety. And in this world, the two rarely coexist. At the lecture, they sit side by side. The speaker drones on about constellations. Thomas whispers a joke. Elena smiles. Her mother coughs. You feel the tension, affection held in check by propriety. Afterward, Thomas helps her into the carriage. His hand brushes hers. Brief, accidental, but enough to make her heart race. Enough to make her mother raise an eyebrow. Enough to remind you that in Victorian London, even a touch could tip the scales. So, as you curl deeper into your blanket, remember, love wasn't just about connection, it was about caution. And for Elena, every step forward came with the risk of falling.
You're standing in the Hartwell parlor again, but this time the air is electric. The fire burns low, the curtains are drawn, and Thomas Weatherby is about to ask the question that will change everything. You're about to witness a Victorian proposal. Formal, trembling, and very, very supervised. Elena sits on the edge of the settee, her gown a soft ivory trimmed with lace. Her hands are folded, her gloves removed. Her mother is present, of course, seated in the corner with her embroidery. Her father stands by the mantel, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ruth is nowhere to be seen. This moment is too important for servants. Thomas arrives precisely on time. His coat is immaculate. His cravat is crisp. He bows to each member of the family, then takes his seat across from Elena. The conversation begins as usual, whether books, a recent sermon, but you feel the shift. His voice is steadier, his gaze more direct. Then he stands, clears his throat, and asks Mr. Hartwell for permission to speak privately with Elena. Her father nods. Her mother sets down her embroidery. The room holds its breath. Thomas turns to Elena. His hands tremble slightly. He speaks of admiration, of respect, of shared values. He says he believes they could build a life of meaning together. He asks if she would consider becoming his wife. Mainstream fact? Victorian proposals were formal affairs, often requiring parental permission and conducted in the presence of family members. Fringe tidbit? Some etiquette manuals advised suitors to rehearse their proposal speeches in advance, including where to stand and how to phrase their intentions. Victorian romance, now with stage directions. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these formal proposals reflected genuine emotional vulnerability or were simply ritualized transactions between families. Elena listens. Her cheeks flush. Her eyes shine. She says yes, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty. Her father nods. Her mother smiles. Thomas bows again. And you feel the room exhale. Later, Ruth brings tea. The engagement is announced. Letters are sent. Neighbors whisper. The florist is commissioned. And Elena, she sits in her room, staring at the ring on her finger. It's modest, gold, no stone, but it glows. She writes in her journal, I am to be married. She doesn't write, I am in love. Not yet. But she writes, I feel safe. I feel seen. And in this world, that's everything. So as you drift deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with permission.
with trembling hands and with the quiet certainty of a life beginning.
You're seated at the solicitor's desk now, the ink still wet on the marriage contract. Eleanor and Thomas are officially engaged, and the machinery of matrimony has begun to turn. You're about to discover that in Victorian London, marriage wasn't just romantic, it was legal, social, and transformative, especially for women. The contract is formal, precise, and binding. It outlines property, inheritance, and expectations. Eleanor's dowry is modest but respectable. Linen, silver, and a small sum held in trust. Thomas signs with a steady hand. Eleanor signs with Ruth's handkerchief tucked discreetly in her sleeve. You feel the weight of the moment, not just emotional, but structural. Mainstream fact: upon marriage, a Victorian woman's legal identity was subsumed under her husband's. She could no longer own property, sign contracts, or retain custody of children without his consent. Fringe tidbit: some progressive families included separate estate clauses in marriage contracts, allowing women to retain control over inherited assets. Victorian feminism, now with fine print. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether marriage contracts empowered women through negotiation or simply codified their legal erasure. You walk with Eleanor through the preparations. Her name is being embroidered onto linens. Mrs. Weatherby. Her initials are changing. Her legal status is changing. Her future is being reshaped, stitch by stitch. She visits the dressmaker. The gown is ivory silk, with lace imported from Belgium. The bodice is modest. The sleeves are long. The train is short, practical, not ostentatious. She chooses a veil, not for mystery, but for tradition. You watch her stand before the mirror, corseted, gloved, and veiled. She looks like a bride. She feels like a question. Her mother advises her on household management. Her father offers a book on moral philosophy. Ruth quietly packs her trunk. You realize that Eleanor isn't just preparing for a wedding. She's preparing to become someone else. The ceremony is set for St. Mary's Church. The banns are read. The invitations are sent. The neighbors gossip. The florist delivers peonies. And Eleanor? She writes in her journal, "I am becoming." She doesn't say what. She doesn't know yet. So as you settle deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, marriage wasn't just a vow, it was a transformation. And for Eleanor, it was the beginning of a new story, written in ink, stitched in silk, and signed with hope.
You're standing just outside the bedroom door now, candle flickering in your hand. The wedding is over. The guests have gone. The cake has been sliced, the bouquet tossed, and the carriage ridden off into a future that smells faintly of lavender and nerves. You're about to witness the Victorian wedding night, PG edition, of course, where expectations are high, emotions are tangled, and reality is complicated. Elelena sits at the vanity, her veil folded neatly beside her. Ruth helped her undress earlier, layer by layer, until only the chemise remains. Her corset is gone. Her hair is down. She looks less like a bride and more like a girl who's just stepped off a cliff and is waiting to see if she'll land. Thomas knocks softly. She says, "Come in." He does. He's nervous too. You can see it in the way he fiddles with his cufflinks, in the way he avoids eye contact. He compliments the room, the flowers, her hair, not her body. That would be too forward, too fast. They sit on the edge of the bed, side by side, not touching. They talk about the ceremony, about the guests, about how the vicar mispronounced Weatherby. You realize they're stalling, and that's okay. Mainstream fact: Victorian wedding nights were often awkward and emotionally fraught, especially given the lack of prior physical intimacy and the weight of social expectations. Fringe tidbit: some brides were given marital advice manuals before the wedding, which ranged from poetic metaphors to outright medical diagrams. Victorian romance, now with illustrated anxiety. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether the emotional restraint of Victorian courtship made wedding nights more difficult, or whether it fostered deeper communication and patience. Thomas finally reaches for her hand. She lets him. They sit in silence. The candle flickers. The fire crackles. You feel the tension shift, not dissolve, but soften. They're not rushing. They're not performing. They're just beginning. Later, Elelena writes in her journal, "He was kind." That's all. No details, no declarations, just kindness. And in this world, that's enough. You leave them there, in the quiet, in the flickering light, in the space between expectation and reality, and you realize that love doesn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it arrives with gentleness. So as you curl deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, the wedding night wasn't a climax. It was a threshold. And for Elelena and Thomas, it was the first step into something real. You're standing in the front hall of a modest townhouse now, the scent of beeswax and fresh bread drifting through the air. Elena is no longer Miss Hartwell. She's Mrs. Weatherby. And today, she's setting up her household. You're about to discover that Victorian marriage wasn't just about romance. It was about management, diplomacy, and the delicate art of domestic command. The house is small but respectable. 2 floors, 4 rooms, 1 maid, and a cook who comes in mornings. Thomas leaves early for the office. Elena stays behind, overseeing everything. You watch her inspect the pantry, adjust the curtains, and write a list of repairs for the landlord. She's not playing house. She's running it.
Her gown is simpler now, cotton, not silk. Her corset still tight, but less punishing. Her hair pinned loosely, she moves with purpose, her steps echoing on polished floorboards. Ruth, now employed as her maid, follows with a notebook. They discuss menus, laundry, and the mystery of the squeaky stair. Mainstream fact: middle-class Victorian wives were expected to manage the household, supervise servants, and maintain social respectability, all without formal training or outside help. Fringe tidbit: some women kept household ledgers that tracked not just expenses, but servant behavior, guest impressions, and even emotional moods. Victorian domesticity, now with spreadsheets. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether domestic management empowered women through responsibility or simply reinforced their confinement to the private sphere. You sit with Elena as she writes thank you notes for wedding gifts. Each one is handwritten, personalized, and sealed with care. She's not just expressing gratitude, she's reinforcing social ties. You realize that in this world, even a teapot requires diplomacy. Later, she hosts her first tea. 3 neighbors arrive. One brings jam, one brings judgment, one brings gossip. Elena smiles, listens, and navigates the conversation like a seasoned diplomat. You're impressed. She's learning fast. Thomas returns home at 6. He compliments the roast, asks about her day. She tells him about the tea, the ledger, the squeaky stair. He listens. They laugh. You feel the rhythm forming, the quiet choreography of partnership. That night, Elena writes in her journal, "I am tired, but I am proud." You nod. She should be. So, as you settle deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't just live in letters. It lived in ledgers, in roast dinners, and the quiet triumph of a well-run home.
You're in the nursery now, the wallpaper soft with faded roses, and the air tinged with milk and lavender. Elena cradles her newborn son, Thomas Jr., wrapped in a knitted blanket. You're about to witness how Victorian love deepened, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, exhausting miracle of parenthood. The birth was long. Ruth was there. So was the midwife, stern, efficient, and slightly superstitious. Thomas waited outside, pacing, praying, clutching a handkerchief until it was damp with worry. When the cry finally came, it was sharp, strong, and unmistakably human. You felt the house exhale. Now, Elena rocks gently in a chair, her corset temporarily abandoned, her hair loose, her gown wrinkled. She hums a lullaby, something her mother used to sing. Thomas enters quietly, kisses her forehead, and gazes at the tiny bundle. You see something shift in him, less solicitor, more father. Mainstream fact: Victorian parenting emphasized moral instruction, religious education, and strict discipline, especially among the middle class. Fringe tidbit: some families hired wet nurses, not just for feeding, but for emotional buffering, outsourcing affection to maintain social decorum. Victorian childcare, now with emotional subcontracting. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether Victorian parenting fostered emotional closeness or reinforced hierarchical control within the family unit. You watch Elelena navigate sleepless nights, teething, and the endless parade of laundry. Ruth helps, Thomas tries, but the bulk of the labor, emotional and physical, falls to her. She doesn't complain. She writes in her journal, "He smiled today. I cried." Their relationship shifts, less courtship, more companionship. They speak in shorthand now. Did you feed him? Did you sleep? Did you remember to eat? You realize that love here is practical. It's survival. It's shared exhaustion. They take walks with the pram. Neighbors coo, gossip flows. Elelena smiles, but you see the fatigue in her eyes. Still, she's proud. She's building something, not just a family, but a life. Thomas reads to the baby at night, Dickens softly, as if the cadence matters more than the content. Elelena listens from the doorway, her hand on the frame, her heart somewhere between joy and disbelief. So, as you curl deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't just bloom in parlors. It bloomed in nurseries, in lullabies, in the quiet, sacred work of becoming a family.
You're seated in the drawing room again. But it's no longer just a parlor, it's a hub. Elelena is hosting a charity tea for the local orphanage, and the room hums with conversation, clinking china, and the faint scent of lemon biscuits. You're about to see how Victorian women, once confined to the domestic sphere, carved out spaces of influence and connection. She greets each guest with grace. Mrs. Penbury, who always arrives early and leaves late. Miss Alcott, who speaks in whispers but listens like a hawk. And Lady Farnsworth, who brings a donation and a dozen unsolicited opinions. Elelena smiles, nods, and navigates the room like a seasoned hostess. You're impressed. Again. The tea is served in porcelain cups with gold trim. Ruth moves quietly between guests, refilling, clearing, offering napkins. Elelena thanks her by name. You note it. Still kind, still watching. Mainstream fact? Victorian women often engaged in charitable work and social hosting as acceptable outlets for public influence and community engagement. Fringe tidbit? Some women formed benevolent societies that doubled as matchmaking networks. Philanthropy with a side of romance. Victorian networking, now with lace gloves. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these social activities empowered women or simply reinforced their roles as moral guardians of the domestic sphere. You follow Elelena to the church hall later that week. She's organizing a clothing drive. She speaks to the vicar, the seamstress, the baker. She's not just participating, she's leading, quietly, effectively. Thomas supports her. He attends events, donates, holds the baby while she speaks. You see their partnership evolve, not just in private, but in public. They're a team now, not just husband and wife, but allies. At home, Elelena writes letters to donors, plans menus, and updates her household ledger. She's balancing budgets and biscuits with equal finesse. You realize she's not just surviving marriage, she's shaping it. She writes in her journal, "I feel useful." It's not a grand declaration, but it's a powerful one. In a world that often limited women to decoration, Elelena is becoming a force.
You sit with her in the quiet after the guests leave. The fire crackles, the baby sleeps, Thomas reads. She sips tea and smiles. You feel the peace, the purpose, the quiet triumph. So as you settle deeper into your blanket, remember, in Victorian London, love didn't just live in letters and lullabies. It lived in community, in service, in the quiet, persistent work of shaping the world. You're walking with Elenina through the garden now, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the gravel path. The roses are in bloom, the baby is asleep. Thomas is inside, reading. And you? You're about to reflect on everything that's unfolded. The slow, deliberate, deeply human journey from strangers to partners. Elenina pauses by the lavender bush, fingers brushing the petals. She's older now. Not old, just seasoned. Her posture is still graceful, her voice still soft, but there's a steadiness to her that wasn't there before. You realize she's grown, not just into marriage, but into herself. She speaks of patience, of how the slow pace of courtship gave her time to think, to feel, to choose. She says, it wasn't passion, not at first, but it became something deeper. You nod. You've seen it. Mainstream fact? Victorian courtship emphasized restraint, patience, and mutual respect, often fostering long-term emotional bonds over fleeting romantic intensity. Fringe tidbit? Some couples kept their courtship letters for decades, rereading them in old age as a reminder of how love began. Victorian nostalgia, now with pressed violets. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether the Victorian model of deliberate courtship created stronger marriages or simply masked emotional repression behind ritual. You walk with her to the bench beneath the elm tree. She sits. You sit beside her. She says, "We built something, slowly, carefully, and it lasted." You believe her. Inside, Thomas calls for tea. She smiles, says, "Coming." But she lingers a moment longer. You feel the quiet contentment in her bones, the peace of a life lived deliberately. She writes in her journal that night, "I am loved, I am known." You close the book gently. You've read every page, and you realize that in Victorian London, love wasn't a spark. It was a flame, tended, protected, and allowed to grow. So as you settle into your blanket one last time, remember, the wisdom of slow love isn't just historical, it's human. And maybe, just maybe, there's something worth reclaiming in the art of patience, respect, and quiet devotion.
The garden fades now, and the light softens. The roses blur into shadows. The gravel path quiets beneath your feet. Elenina's story is complete. Not dramatic, not explosive, but enduring. And as the last candle flickers out, you feel the gentle hush of a life well lived. You breathe slower. The air feels thicker, warmer. The sounds of Victorian London, carriage wheels, distant church bells, the rustle of silk, fade into a soft hum. You're not in the parlor anymore. You're in the quiet space between memory and dream. Elena and Thomas are asleep now, their child tucked safely in the nursery, the house wrapped in stillness. You imagine the fire glowing low, the teacups washed and shelved, the journal closed on the desk. Everything in its place, everything earned. And you've walked beside them, through corsets and courtship, letters and lullabies, proposals and peonies. You've seen how love can grow, not in haste, but in harmony. Not in sparks, but in steady flame. So let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift. Let the quiet wisdom of Victorian love settle into your bones. You're safe here. You're warm. You're ready to rest. Good night, traveler. Sleep well, and may your dreams be stitched with patience, pressed with violets, and sealed with wax.